You know, every once in a while you have those moments where you go, you know what, I really want to go and do something, but I should probably wait. Give it just a little bit of time, and guess what? My waiting totally paid off. I was absolutely correct to do so.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
All right, it's not all about me, but I was totally correct, and I'll explain in just a moment. Welcome to episode 94 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. I was going to do a podcast last week, and I had everything all turned on. I had everything ready to go with the announcement that Colin Trevorrow, or Trevorrow, or however the Sam hell you say it, doesn't really matter. He's not directing episode 9 anymore. But when word came down that Colin Trevorrow wasn't going to be directing Star Wars Episode 9, I was going to podcast. And I said, nope, not going to do it. You want to know why? Because I bet in a week I'm going to have to do another podcast, which I would have done anyways, but still. I was planning on doing it Friday. It's only Tuesday, so you can see sort of my timeline there. The news broke about 6 days ago. I remember because I tweeted what was going to happen, and I was absolutely right. So I was actually right twice. So I was going to podcast last week, and I said, no, you know what? I did the Big Force Friday podcast, and I didn't really have a ton of news apart from Colin Trevorrow. And we'll talk about Colin Trevorrow and my thoughts about him not being the director, but I really didn't want to spend 45 minutes talking Star Wars about a director who's no longer going to be directing a Star Wars movie. I mean, it's fun and interesting and all, but I really was like, yeah, you know what? I bet we'll get an announcement in about a week, if it takes that long. And it was about 6 days, where today, right around 9:30 this morning, I'm walking through iHeartRadio here in Minneapolis, and my little notification on my phone goes off, and my prediction that J.J. Abrams, director of the most profitable movie in American history, for all you complaining that J.J. Abrams is going to be directing Episode 9, will be directing Episode 9. So, look, let's get into all of it. All right, first off, I love Star Wars for so many different reasons. Secondly, am I happy about J.J. Abrams? Yes, I am. Very happy about this and J.J. Abrams, and I will give my full explanation. So let's back up to, well, we got to back up before last week. All right, we've got to back up to, it's kind of a while ago. Well, let's back up to when Colin Trevorrow got tapped to direct Episode 9. When Disney Lucasfilm announced that they were going to be making another sequel trilogy. We got the director for The Force Awakens, fairly quickly after the announcement. And it was announced that J.J. Abrams was going to direct it, and I was happy with that. And again, I'll get into all that. That's to the reason why. As to the reason why. Lots of reason whys. That doesn't make any sense. Then we got the announcement that Rian Johnson was going to be doing Episode 8, which was like, okay, that's interesting. And then further down after the release of Jurassic World, and it became... Jurassic World I think still holds the top spot. Or did I think Force Awakens might have beaten it now. Or maybe Titanic still holds it. It's those three. I think it's worldwide totals. Right? Or is it still Avatar? Anyways, Jurassic World did what it did. And Disney, Lucasfilm tapped Colin Trevorrow, who had directed a really fun, sort of quirky, independent movie, Safety Not Guaranteed, Jurassic World. And then subsequently, we'll talk just briefly about this movie called What About Henry, that bombed at the box office, that got panned by most of the people that saw it. I didn't see it. I can't comment on it. based off a few people that have seen it that actually liked it, I'll probably enjoy it, but I know there's a lot of people that just didn't like the movie. Okay. I warmed up to Rian Johnson, and everything that we've seen from Rian Johnson so far looks good, and we'll talk a little Rian Johnson. I was down with Colin Trevorrow based solely off of the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy kind of mirroring it. And I explained this before a while back when it was announced. I mean, this is many episodes. Who knows how many in we were at the time. But I explained before that Colin Trevorrow seemed like the perfect director to bring the last episode home. You use J.J. Abrams because he is a good, and everybody's been talking about this today. J.J. Abrams is a good setup guy. He sets everything up really, really well. You look at Lost, you look at what he did with The Force Awakens, that's what The Force Awakens was. It was a big setup. It was a return to remind everybody about the Star Wars universe. And really, when people talk about it being sort of a rehash of A New Hope, quite honestly, it was a rehash of all three movies. I mean, there's elements from 4, 5, and 6 throughout The Force Awakens. And I have no problem with any of that. But JJ himself said they had to go backwards to go forwards. That was his job. And he did an amazing job with that. It is, you kind of define all 7, 8 movies now on their own merits and the different things they do. But it is arguably sort of my desert island Star Wars movie. If I'm stuck on a desert island, I can only bring one Star Wars movie. It's between Force Awakens and The Empire Strikes Back. It's close, real close. And I would probably end up going with the Force Awakens. The only reason why The Empire Strikes Back would beat it is just because of the love story between Han and Leia, and I really like that romance element of it because I'm just that kind of guy. But I thought Colin Trevorrow was a really, really good Bring It Home Episode 9 guy. He did a very sort of straightforward Jurassic World, reintroduced the public to the Jurassic movies. They had, lost their shine after 2 and 3. And, I mean, I enjoyed them, but none of them were as good as the first one. And he made a gazillion-dollar blockbuster out of it. And when you look at what Return of the Jedi was, and, people don't talk about this enough when you talk about rehashes. I mean, look at Return of the Jedi, for crying out loud. You want to talk, we start off back on Tatooine the same way we did. We start off with the same opening shot as A New Hope, for crying out loud. No one ever talks about that. The Star Destroyer flying overhead, yeah. We have another Death Star, yeah. We end up, going directly to Tatooine, yeah. We blow it up at the end of, the movie, the new Death Star 2, yeah. It's so funny that people give The Force Awakens such a hard time, but Jedi was more of a rehash. Certainly more on the nose. It wasn't like Starkiller Base, like a planet that they made into a gigantic machine that could kill. It was, it was another Death Star in Return of the Jedi. So I thought that Colin Trevorrow would have done a fine job of bringing in that action element and taking it all home. And I still feel like he would have. I trust what they've done. And so what we've heard from the reports about Colin Trevorrow leaving the production, not getting booted from Episode 9. We know they were bringing in another writer. Colin Trevorrow was using one of his screenwriters. They brought in another guy who had done some TV work to kind of punch up the script. And it just sounds like with the failure of his movie, What About Henry, that there was a lot of trepidation going on inside Lucasfilm. There was a secondary story that came out. I don't know I can't remember who broke it. But there was another story that came out and basically said that Kathleen Kennedy was butting heads with Colin Trevorrow. That Colin Trevorrow had a vision for what he wanted to do for Episode 9, and it was going against what Kathleen Kennedy wanted to do. Many individuals close to their production said that he had an attitude, that he was really arrogant, that he was kind of arrogant when he made Jurassic World, but that he was Steven Spielberg's pick, so nobody really pushed back on him, so they just kind of let him do his thing, and it ended up being a massive hit, and that made him, intolerable. And so he was butting heads with Kathleen Kennedy, which is something you just don't do. And she's like, I ain't got no time for this. We can't risk this franchise. And so she fired him. And it's very similar to what happened with Lord and Miller, right? Same thing. Almost happened with Rogue One. There was some differences with the movie, the original cut, that this is what we've heard, that Gareth Edwards delivered to Lucasfilm, to Kathleen Kennedy, and it was a little bit too war of a movie for them. So they brought in Tony Gilroy to reshoots and retool it, and we got a great movie out of it. So it doesn't surprise me Disney's not going to mess around. I've said this from day one. Disney and Lucasfilm, they're too... Star Wars is too important to you and to me for them to make a bad movie. Yeah, I would argue that it's one of the franchises where they may never make a bad movie. And I know that seems like kind of a ridiculous statement to make, but you've got enough creative people with the story group, with Pablo Hidalgo, with Kiri Hart, with Kathleen Kennedy, with all the minds at Lucasfilm. You've got enough people and powerful voices who care about this world as much as we fans do. You're never, in my opinion, ever going to have a situation where George Lucas is running the show and everyone's just going, yeah, George, Jar Jar, he's going to be really funny. That Jar Jar guy's going to be great. He's going to be a He's totally, you should do more of that. You should make him talk stranger, George. Totally. If you've seen the movie Popstar, there's a moment in Popstar where Connor for real, the main character, he's got just two yes men around him, and he tests out his best friend in the yes man, and that's what it is. It reminds me of George Lucas and the people that were around him. They trusted in his creative vision. And look, we won't spend time here. We've talked about this a ton. I do like the prequels. I think there's a lot of genius in the prequels. They have their flaws. They are a different type of movie. They are specifically Lucas went for a particular type of acting that the public just didn't really like. And I get it. I understand the way that he made sort of the wonky, on the nose type of dialogue, but he was going for something very specific. And, at the time, you don't have people that are really going to push back on that. Kathleen Kennedy is smart about the franchise, and I think she's smart to listen to the people around her and to trust her own instincts. And so, yeah, they're not going to let a bad movie get made. And so if you got a guy like Colin Trevorrow, who's got all the money in the world, who doesn't need to worry about it, and I think we forget about that too. You kind of go, you kind of look at Lord and Miller and the success that they've had, whether it's 21 Jump Street, certainly the Lego movie, right? And you kind of go, they're probably pretty well off. They're more than likely going to go and direct the Flash movie. We forget the fact that these are individuals that aren't like you and me. They don't need a gig. And so when you don't need a gig, it's kind of twofold. One, I think as a content generator, as a company, you want people like that. You want creative people that are willing to take risks, who aren't doing it just for the paycheck, because you're going to get better quality work out of them. But at the same time, you're also going to get individuals who are going to be very, very arrogant in thinking that they know what's best. And in this case, without knowing specifically what happened with Colin Trevorrow, even though I thought he probably would have done a pretty good job, I think that Disney did the right thing. They're not going to, and certainly now with getting JJ back, I believe they absolutely did the right thing. And so, when it happened, I wasn't necessarily relieved, but I was totally fine with it. I mean, the question really was, who are they going to get to direct Episode 9 now? A lot of people were pointing to Rian Johnson. I was pointing to Rian Johnson. But to be honest, I think a lot of fans, people have their different reasons, but a lot of fans were pointing to Rian Johnson. Well, why? Well, because Rian Johnson did the one new Star Wars movie apart from J.J. Abrams that didn't have any controversy attached to it. How long is that? Hold on. I'm going to pull it up right now. This is what I find so ridiculous. Okay. So apart from the behind the scenes video, okay, that we've all seen, right? This is the one that came out in July, which doesn't have any footage. Okay. So don't forget, this does not have, this is, the behind the scenes does not have any footage at all. Okay. So what do we got? We got a bunch of images. We have comments, very vague comments from actors. We have a synopsis. The teaser is 2 minutes and 27 seconds, but who are we kidding? The first, 45 seconds, if not more, the first 3 shots are water and an island. And then, Rey standing there. I mean, it doesn't give us anything. So we've seen, okay, we've seen 1:30. That doesn't include dialogue, apart from Luke saying, breathe, just breathe, what do you see? The light, darkness, balance. It's so much bigger. I only know one truth. It's time for the Jedi to end. I just gave you all the dialogue that we've heard from the movie. And yet everybody's going, get Rian Johnson. Even I was going, get Rian Johnson. Well, why? Well, because we like the trailer, even though it didn't show us anything. We like the visuals we've seen so far. For a person like me, we know there's some prequel elements to it. I've seen that in some of the pictures. But he's also the guy that hasn't had any controversy. He just made the movie. We like Rian Johnson as a person. The dude's a great dude. I think Looper's a great movie. I rewatched The Brothers Bloom the other day, and I like that movie. It's a little bloated. You could trim it down by probably 20 minutes and chop it up a bit. You know, it's different, but I enjoyed that movie. Brick I didn't care for so much. So to first off say that, oh, this movie's going to suck because Rian Johnson didn't direct it. I mean, maybe if we got a second trailer, you could form a different opinion about that. But really, no, we just don't know. We do trust Lucasfilm, and I'll go back to that. Let me, and I guess I should probably rework this opinion a bit. As somebody who would have been fine with Rian Johnson directing Episode 9, because he's the one that did 8, I have faith that 8's going to be great. Staring at the poster that they released, the one with Luke and Kylo and Rey on it, just the red one. And I made I printed up a nice quality photo of it and threw it in a frame because I love that imagery so much. But Rian Johnson as a person, he seems like a really, really good dude. The dude just seems like the kind of guy you just want to hang out with and just talk Star Wars with. He seems like a great guy, like a nice guy. And we like nice guys. But that's it. So I liked the idea of him doing 9 because I really do think that he's done something special with 8. And we know from the people around that have seen The Last Jedi that we know from, Bob Iger and, who was there was another guy. Was it Tom Horn? Is that right? Alan Horn? Something Horn. We know Mr. Horn. Mr. Horn has seen the movie like 7 times. They're all directly, they all work for Disney and Lucasfilm. And they've said it's really good. So, I liked the idea of taking what Rian Johnson did and then moving it into the last movie and having him bring it home. Well, we found out, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, that after we got the announcement of J.J. Abrams directing Episode 9, that Rian Johnson had, from what we hear according to Deadline, is that Rian Johnson had gone and turned down directing Episode 9. And you can't really blame the dude. Again, I imagine he has a pretty sweet deal with Disney, right, with Lucasfilm. I imagine he's going to be just fine financially. And he's not even done. I mean, he was in Japan just this week promoting the movie. And we haven't even gotten the first full trailer, which now it looks like we'll probably get in about 34 days. Everybody's kind of anticipating that's going to come out on October 16th. That's at least the target date. So it's not a huge surprise that he turned it down. And so you go, all right, so if Johnson's not going to do it, and we'll put JJ off to the side. Well, who else do you get to do it? I don't really know. There were no directors that were really coming to the top of my mind. I know a lot of people said Steven Spielberg. I was not in favor of that. I like Spielberg, but Spielberg does very Spielberg movies now. And maybe that's a little unfair because I rewatched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the Indiana Jones movie the other day, and it certainly had a different vibe to it than, say, your Minority Report or your AI. But he has gotten into sort of this trend of making films that have a certain style to them, but no different than JJ did, and JJ changed it up for The Force Awakens. But, I consider Steven Spielberg better for the Ready Player One, which I can't wait for, than doing a Star Wars movie. That's not to say that I would have been sad about that. I'm sure he would have turned in a great Star Wars movie. There's no doubt. I just didn't. That wasn't certainly top of my list. And let me just I'll take just a moment to address this part, because I didn't see very many other names other than that. I heard a lot of people saying they didn't want JJ, a lot of people saying they wanted Ryan, a lot of people saying they wanted Steven Spielberg. The other thing that I heard the most was this, and just bear with me, because I just need to get it out of my system, so I'm going to go doing that thing with my fingers political for just a moment. But please listen to what I'm saying, okay? Don't just hear what you want to hear. Listen to what I'm saying. There were a lot of people that were saying that whoever the director of Episode 9 was going to be needed to be either a person of color or a woman. And that's all they said. Now, that was one segment of people. And I get it. I understand. And I'm fine with female directors. I'm fine with directors of color, persons of color directing films. What I'm not fine with is this, it needs to be this way just because. Because I also heard a lot of people saying that if it's not Rian Johnson, then it needs to be a person of color or a woman. So it was like, and specifically not another white male. And I'm sorry, I was very bothered by that. So if it's Rian Johnson, that white guy's okay. And I'm saying this as a white male, but that white guy's okay because he's already, on the payroll. But if it's not that white guy, then it needs to be a person of color or it needs to be a woman. And no. You know who it needs to be? It needs to be who the best director is for this particular movie, who is going to have the best vision for that movie. And that's end of story. If that happens to be a person of color, great. If that happens to be a woman, fantastic. If it happens to be a white male, so what? If it happens to be somebody LGBTQ, fine. As long as they're the best for that job. And I was getting really, really annoyed hearing so many podcasts saying that. And no talk of, it needs to be the best person for the job. It was, no, it needs to be, again, a person of color or a woman. And I disagree with that. Because that's discrimination on an individual who doesn't meet that description for the sake of that description. And I just was really troubled by that. And I would, and if I was a woman or a person of color and I was chosen just because of that, I would hope that they would be bothered. That they would be bothered by that too. I mean, I'm not that, so I can't speak to that. But I just, not to mention the fact, and one more point on this, and then I'll get off my soapbox, but the person doing the hiring is a woman. She runs Lucasfilm. That was the other part of this equation too. Like, people were genuinely getting upset. Like, arguing with me. We failed if we don't have it be a woman. What do you... That's kind of insulting to Kathleen Kennedy, who's choosing the directors. Oh, and by the way, fired a bunch of white males. All right. This is fun because, let me get off that. I'm off my soapbox. I'm a big fan of hire the best first person of the job, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender, or their skin color. All right, there, I said it. In the meantime, I have breaking news to share.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
I have just received a tweet right in the middle of when I am podcasting this. Star Wars has just tweeted out that Star Wars Episode 9 is now scheduled for release on December 20th of 2019. Now, why is that significant? Because it was supposed to be May of 2019. And there was a lot of speculation that when they tapped J.J. Abrams to direct this movie, that it was going to be, that they were going to push it. Because it was supposed to be released in May. So, let's back up again a little bit, and then we'll get to J.J. But yeah, this just broke, and again... Star Wars on Twitter just released it, Episode 9, scheduled for release on December 20th of 2019. So this is going to be apparently a week after Wonder Woman 2 gets released, if I'm not mistaken. Hold on, I got to pull up a couple other tweets here, and I will tell you that specifically. So the Wonder Woman sequel is currently slated for December 13th, 2019. Not sure WB is going to blink on this one like they did with Batman vs. Superman. And there it is, Star Wars Episode 9 to be released in December 2019. Look, they were talking about moving all the Star Wars films back to May. I mentioned on the last podcast that I got this amazing The Last Jedi t-shirt that had all the release dates on it. And they're all May release dates until you get to The Force Awakens and Rogue One. But it looked like they were going to try to shift the movies back to May. Now, we know we're still getting the Han Solo movie in May of next year. And then we were under the impression that we'd be a year off from getting the final Star Wars movie, and now it looks like we're going to have an extended wait again for that movie. But it makes sense because filming on Episode 9 was supposed to start in January, and it looks like with J.J. Abrams now directing Episode 9, that they're going to be starting from scratch because they actually got another writer to work with JJ on Episode 9 as well. And look, as a fan, I'm bummed because I liked the idea of us getting Episode 8. We only have to wait some 6 months until we get the Han Solo movie. And then we would only have to wait a year for May of the following year to get our final Star Wars movie, and now we're going to have to wait a year and a half to get our final Star Wars movie. But when you kind of break it down, it makes a lot of sense. And personally, man, I was excited about it going back to May because I was kind of happy with it not being around Christmas. But to be honest with you, I kind of like the Star Wars movies around Christmas. I think it's cool. I think that makes a really, really cool tradition. And it might be the last time we do it, depending on if they make any more sequel movies, because I imagine that Disney is probably going to keep to that May date. The other interesting thing to note about that December 20th date is, what does that mean for another spin-off movie? And maybe is that the reason why we haven't got a firm confirmation on an Obi-Wan Kenobi spin-off movie? So now all of this is really starting to make sense. They've probably been having problems with Colin Trevorrow for a while and been thinking of what they are going to do were they to get rid of him. And we need to talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll wrap up the show this week talking a bit about JJ and why I'm excited to see another J.J. Abrams directed movie.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Okay, so consider this your midpoint of the podcast. I had to take a break for a moment and step off, but let's continue. So, Colin Trevorrow's out. They probably knew about Colin Trevorrow leaving for a while. And think about like at your job when you know that things aren't going well and you start to see the writing on the wall. We were all expecting an announcement about an Obi-Wan Kenobi spinoff movie that never ever came. We got semi-confirmation that they may have a director, but we never got a date on it. And now that we know that Episode 9 is going to get pushed forward, another 6 months, then I don't know if that leaves enough space to wedge in another spin-off movie until 2020. So I would imagine that that's what's going to happen. We'll get The Last Jedi here in less than 3 months. We'll get the Han Solo movie in May of next year. We'll get Episode 9 come December 20th of 2019. And then I imagine the earliest we'll get the next Star Wars movie will be in May of 2020, and that will probably be, if all the rumors are true, the Obi-Wan Kenobi movie. I do find it interesting that Star Wars, the website, and Lucasfilm, the Twitter page, that they're moving so quickly on a lot of these announcements. I feel like they want to get them out of the way. We have the Star Wars show that comes up tomorrow. That's the weekly YouTube channel show where they drop a lot of news and break a lot of news. I personally think there's still a possibility we might get that Last Jedi trailer before next month. I know that it would break the tradition that they're following the mold of April teaser, July behind the scenes, October trailer, but that was just The Force Awakens, so we're only going off history. And it's, my personal preference that if I were Disney, I'd want to get that trailer out there and everybody talking about The Last Jedi and get Episode 9 out of everybody's mind. And so let's talk about Episode 9, because that statement, right, of get it out of everybody's mind, when we watch the movie, we're not going to care. I mean, we may talk about the style of the director when the film is over, but when we're sitting with our butts in the seats on opening night, and when we're watching it at home when the Blu-ray comes out, I'm not watching The Force Awakens, and I won't be watching The Last Jedi, and I'm not watching the other films thinking about, for the most part, the directors. I'm just enjoying the movie for what it is. I just want a good movie. J.J. Abrams makes good movies. The movies that he's made, there's not one that I don't like. Super 8. I love Super 8. I loved both Star Trek movies. I'm one of the few that I think actually likes Into Darkness more than the 2010 Star Trek movie, and I love the 2010 Star Trek movie. Mission Impossible 3, that movie is infinitely watchable to me. The Force Awakens, same thing. J.J. Abrams makes great movies. And I don't think that people give him enough credit for the work that he does with actors and the relationships in those movies. He does a fantastic job. And if Ryan Johnson... So Ryan Johnson at the Japanese press conference that took place this week, he made a comment that, and I'll actually, I think I have it up. He made a comment that Ryan said, "We see the cracks in Kylo's armor in The Force Awakens. We're going to rip them open." The Last Jedi is the middle chapter when kind of everything goes to pot, right? Everything gets cut loose. Ryan Johnson has said that he's not going with sort of this cliffhanger ending. I believe he's established that he's not going to be having that. But, I mean, obviously there'll be questions that need to be answered, certainly when it comes to Carrie Fisher and her untimely passing. But, if this is the movie where kind of everything gets turned on its head and we're to believe, and it turns out that it's true, that we're really going to be changing a lot of what we know about the franchise, then it really sets up a great episode 9 to resolve everything and resolve these relationships. Because Ryan Johnson has said from the start that he wanted to put all of the main characters in challenging positions. Rey is going to have her Jedi training challenge. Luke is going to be challenged because he exiled himself, and now he has this new, for lack of a better term, probably the most appropriate term, new Padawan in Rey's Jedi training. Finn and Rose are going to go on an adventure. Kylo Ren is obviously going to be dealing with his emotional issues, killing of his father, and what Snoke wants to do with him, and dealing with the dark side. J.J. Abrams handles relationships. They're fantastic. He's great at writing. Now, he's not going to be the only one writing this. Chris Terrio, who was the writer on Argo, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Justice League. Let's see, what else has he worked on here? Richard II. See, he's directed a few films. Let's see, Heights, Book of Kings, and Damages. So he's mostly known as a writer. So Chris Terrio is going to be brought on board to help in the writing with J.J. Abrams of Episode 9. And let me pull this up real quick. Okay, that's what I was looking for. There was one tweet from @AgeOfMyself, who wrote, Chris Terrio is a great fit for Star Wars. Lucas was a huge follower of Joseph Campbell. As a matter of fact, Joseph Campbell said that Lucas was like one of his best students, even though he never taught him, apart from the time that he spent crafting the story, the mythology for Star Wars. Lucas was a huge follower of Joseph Campbell, and so is Terrio. Look, that alone is perfect. That alone is perfect. Because we need somebody who gets the lore to bring it all home in Episode 9. And so, yeah, I'm happy with this. Now, the interesting thing to note is J.J. Abrams is going to hold the record for most Star Wars movies directed, next to George Lucas himself. But again, it makes all the sense in the world that they would do that. He did such a great job with The Force Awakens. What matters when this is all said and done is what kind of trilogy is this going to be? And nobody's talking about that yet, and you probably shouldn't talk about that yet until we get to December and we see The Last Jedi. But, when you talk about the great trilogies, certainly the original Star Wars trilogy is in the mix there for discussion, right? And you talk about the Lord of the Rings, and you talk about Back to the Future. A lot of people have been talking about, as of late, the Planet of the Apes movies. I haven't heard anybody really mentioning yet, and again, maybe it's because we haven't seen The Last Jedi, but I haven't heard anybody mentioning yet where The Force Awakens, where the sequel trilogy in Star Wars is going to land in those trilogy movies. And based off of what we've seen so far, and now with all that we know from not just The Last Jedi, but with the director and this co-writer in Chris Terrio, I think it's going to be ranked right up there. And I would put the original trilogy in that mix as well. I mean, the prequel trilogy in that mix of great trilogies too. And I know people would argue with me. I know people that hate those movies, but as a Star Wars fan, I love those three films, and they flow together great. You know, I look for cohesiveness in trilogies and the way that they all kind of flow together. And the prequels actually do a better job than the original trilogy did. When you go A New Hope to Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi, all three of those movies, they all have that 80s kind of vibe around them. But at the same time, they're also, all three of them are very different in the way that they are styled, in the acting. You get to Return of the Jedi and things get kind of goofy. Han gets kind of goofy. They're all different. I mean, none of these are complaints, but if you were just basing a trilogy off of how cohesive all three movies were, the prequels are way, way, way more cohesive than the original trilogy was. And I think that I don't even think that the sequel trilogy, I think The Last Jedi already, and I talked about this on last week's podcast, I think The Last Jedi already has a different sort of look and style to it. And based off of what I've seen with Looper and with the Brothers Bloom, I don't think there's any doubt that it's going to have a very different look and feel and style to it. So I think it'll be great to have it bookended with what JJ did with The Force Awakens, with this good sort of middle piece. It's going to be even closer to kind of what that original trilogy was. One more quick comment on Colin Trevorrow, and people keep asking, why does this keep happening within the Star Wars universe? Somebody wrote an article saying that that the Colin Trevorrow story and what happened with the other directors, proves that no director is too big for Star Wars, right? It basically proves that the franchise and the history of it comes first. You're never going to have sort of what you've had with the DC universe, and like a Suicide Squad situation. They'll never let it get that far. They'll fix it and make it right. I'm convinced that they would scrap a whole movie before they put out something that they didn't feel was the best thing that they could possibly release. I think the problem that they've had is that they've tapped these directors too soon. When you look at Lord and Miller, they were a hot commodity. They did 21 Jump Street, the Lego Movie, who thought that was going to work. And then suddenly they're wanted by a lot of different studios, and so Disney Lucasfilm gobbles them up to do the Han Solo movie, and then they get the script from Kasdan, and then they want to do their own thing, and it doesn't work out, and then they get fired. Colin Trevorrow, massive hit with Jurassic World. Look at what he's done. We better grab him before somebody does, but he doesn't have anything to work on. Rian Johnson is still writing the script for The Last Jedi. According to Rian Johnson, he was just handed basically The Force Awakens Blu-ray and said, there you go, dude. You do with it what you want. Here's a bit of a guideline of where we think everything's going, but we laid it out. Now you take the story where you want it to go. And he had free reign. So if that's the case, then essentially you have Colin Trevorrow, who has to sit back and kind of wait and twiddle his thumbs until they're at a point where they can go and show him the movie or give him the screenplay, and then he can look at it and go, okay, all right, I see what you've got going on here. Let me go and craft my story. Then you have Carrie Fisher going and passing away. And how are you going to handle that if it's true that they didn't change anything in the Last Jedi? And you could certainly have differences of opinion on how you're supposed to deal with Carrie Fisher and Princess Leia not being in the last movie. I mean, there's so much potential for things to go wrong. So I think the problem was they just jumped too quick on hiring directors and without having the material. I think the benefit that Rian Johnson had was with it, he wrote that movie and directed that movie, and he did that all by himself. And that wasn't happening with Colin Trevorrow. And it kind of won't happen with episode 9, but I think that JJ is probably just bringing in a secondary individual in Chris Terrio, because he'll probably go a very similar route to what he did with The Force Awakens, where he and Lawrence Kasdan just walked around with the tape recorder coming up with ideas. And so I'll just say it again. I think it's a great choice. And I'm excited to see J.J. Abrams put another movie on the screen. And so let me get to the last few minutes of the podcast and tell you what I expect. For those that are saying and thinking that we're going to get another Death Star or we're going to get a rehash of Return of the Jedi, I don't think we will. J.J. said when he made The Force Awakens, after it was done, that he needed to reestablish the universe to bring everybody back, to tap in all of the nostalgia that they could, to remind everybody what Star Wars was, and that would leave open 8 and 9 to go to new, different types of worlds and tell different types of stories. And I think that JJ is now going to have the freedom to go and do that. I also think that the media, social networking, and fan comments are important. And when JJ made The Force Awakens, I disagree with this, but when they were talking about Maz Kanata's castle and having a cantina-like, bar in The Force Awakens, he's like, well, he said, if I were a fan, I'd be asking, well, where's the cantina scene? Why don't we have a cantina scene? And so we did our version of a cantina scene. Now, I disagree with that. As a fan, I didn't need to see a cantina scene. But I think he had a legitimate reason and a point to believe that and think that. And I think there may have been some fans out there that are more casual than I am who would have been wondering where's the cantina scene. But the biggest criticism of The Force Awakens has been from people that it was too much of a rehash of A New Hope. And I think J.J. Abrams probably heard that, and he probably won't do that. And he's going to be building it off of whatever Rian Johnson does in The Last Jedi, and we'll all find out here in a couple months. And I think he's going to end up making a great movie. And again, going off of, I love Super 8, both Star Treks, Mission Impossible 3, and The Force Awakens. They're all, I could watch, if anybody puts one of those in, I am not telling him to take it out, because I love all of those movies. And so the fact that we get another J.J. Abrams Star Wars movie after how great The Force Awakens was, yeah, I'm good with that. Oh, that was a lot of breaking news. Holy cow. All right, so hopefully we're back next week. If not sooner than that, maybe we'll get a trailer for The Last Jedi. Man, if I were Disney, I'd do it. Let's get everybody to stop talking about Episode 9. That's really just the fanboy in me hoping and praying that happens. So thanks for checking out the show. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter, @Jon Justice. Listen to the radio show, Justice and Drew, Monday through Friday, 6 until 9 on Twin Cities News Talk. You can find that on the iHeartRadio app, where you can also find this podcast. If you listen on iTunes, subscribe, and be sure to drop me a rating if you don't mind. I'd appreciate it. So have yourself a fantastic rest of the week, and until episode number 95, may the Force be with you always.
My Nerd World.